Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election, and I'll be giving my updated prediction for this map. It's only been, I think, 2 weeks since I last did one of these, but obviously things have changed a lot since then. In fact, half the equation has changed. Kamala Harris is now the Democratic nominee, no longer Joe Biden, and again, I was away for a week and a half, so I chose like the worst possible time to not be at home to record videos. But regardless, there's so much to cover here. We have so much to unpack, and the situation is so unprecedented that I don't want to waste any more time with the introduction. Let's get into it. So we're going to begin by filling out the safe states for Kamala Harris. And these are actually going to, I think, for the most part, remain the same for Joe, as you know, compared to Joe Biden for Kamala Harris. As we get more into the video, you'll see the differences, but she's going to get 191 safe electoral votes. Trump's going to get, I think, around 120, if I'm not mistaken, although we're about to find out. And I'm also going to put states like Kansas in there because I don't think they'll be Trump plus 15, but I do think that they're not really competitive. Same with South Carolina, which is a state that I'm actually moving down from safe Trump to likely Trump just because I think Kamala Harris creates better black turnout than Biden. We've seen in the polls that enthusiasm for Harris is better, but a lot of that stems from the fact that instead of winning black voters by 55, Harris wins them by 72. And that matters a lot in states like South Carolina, where the Democratic electorate is primarily black. She won't win the state, but I think she'll do better than Biden in a meaningful way. And also means second district. So those are the states that are functionally safe. Harris, I think, is also going to win New Mexico, Minnesota, Virginia, and New Hampshire, as well as Maine, likely. Also Nebraska, too. I don't really want to talk too much about any of these. I think New Mexico and Virginia are kind of clearly in this column. Minnesota and New Hampshire have historically been a little closer. We'll talk about the national polls in a second here, but just to kind of start with New Hampshire, we saw St. Anselm have Trump up by 2 in the days following the debate against Biden. They now have Harris up by 6. So we have an 8-point swing in her direction in New Hampshire, which is massive because it's one poll in the span of like 3 weeks, and they have an 8-point swing towards the Democrats. Emerson, which is a decent pollster, they have Harris up by 6. They actually underestimated Democrats a lot in 2022, but they have Harris up by 6 here, and then UNH has her up by 6 as well. So again, broadly pretty good polling for Harris in New Hampshire. I think she'll win it by the same amount as Biden in 2020. It's a left-running state. People really underestimate how well Democrats do here. Again, in 2022, Maggie Hassan outran Joe Biden. So generally speaking, New Hampshire has been pretty blue in recent years, and I don't think it's going to change this year. Minnesota, obviously, it's possible Kamala Harris chooses Tim Walz as her VP. If that happens, Minnesota will be, instead of like a 6-point margin, maybe like an 8 or 9-point margin for Harris. But I'm making this video assuming like we don't know who the VP is, so I'm not going to give her like a boost in Arizona if it's Mark Kelly or Minnesota, or if it's Tim Walz, if it's Josh Shapiro, Pennsylvania. None of that until she actually announces who it is. But to go back to the polls here, Survey USA has her up by 10, which is very good for her. Redfield, which is a more GOP-leaning pollster, has her up by 3. And then we have her up by 6 in Fox, which is a pretty reputable pollster, actually. A lot of people don't like Fox, but I think they have an A- rating, so they're pretty good. But anyways, they have a Harris up by 6 in Minnesota, and I think that's the margin I expect her to win it by. So I think that's sufficient to talk about the likely states for Harris. I don't really think any of these are too controversial. Virginia is going from lean to likely just because Biden was polling so poorly there, and I think Harris will, stop the bleeding. But even with Biden, I think he still would have won Virginia comfortably by like 5 or 6 points. Now, let's go over to our likely Trump states. I think some of these are pretty obvious. Alaska, Iowa, Ohio, Florida. For now, that'll be it. Alaska, I think, could be a sleeper in terms of trending left. It swung 5 points towards Biden in 2020, and in 2022, it was pretty good for Democrats, with Democrats winning the House race and Lisa Murkowski getting reelected, which was the outcome Democrats would have preferred. So, again, this is a state that I think Harris won't win, but could maybe come within 8 points of winning, for example, instead of like 10. Iowa and Ohio are kind of the opposite. They trended towards Trump in 2020, and we actually have pretty decent polls in Ohio because there's a Senate race there. So when they poll the Senate race, they usually ask who you're voting for in the presidential race, which is nice. Sherrod Brown's winning all the Senate polls, by the way, so he actually might somehow win re-election. I'll talk about that more later. But Trump's up by 10 in the latest Fabrizio poll. Now, this is a Trump-aligned pollster. Tony Fabrizio actually is Trump's personal pollster for his campaign. He has been for the past 8 years. But he's up by 10, and, it's a decent pollster. I don't have any animosity towards them. And then prior to the debate, or prior to Harris becoming the nominee, Marist had only had Trump up by 7, and then we saw Trump was up by 10 in Remington. So he's up, high single digits, low double digits consistently. And I think Kamala Harris does better than Biden in like the cities of Cleveland and Columbus and potentially the suburbs, but I think in rural Ohio, there's not really much of a difference to be made either way. So the state will stay red. Florida, a lot of people have been talking about how Harris can maybe win Florida. We do have some polls here that I want to talk about briefly. Trump's up by 7 in the U of North Florida recent poll. Then we have a poll from right after Harris became the nominee, had Trump up by 8. I don't know, though. I don't really think – I think these are pretty good. I don't really have any strong feelings on them. I think this is the margin we're looking at, which is well within the likely column. Democrats in general don't really seem to think they have a chance here, which is the correct take. And Kamala Harris will not win Florida. So that is 179 electoral votes for Trump. Now going into our more battleground states, you'll notice that there's actually one state that's been added to the battleground category, which is Texas. Now Texas to me isn't necessarily a real battleground state. I don't think it's actually like competitive or really anywhere close to a toss-up, but the margin will get smaller. Not in that way, though. So let's just zoom out for a second. So nationally, Kamala Harris is up by 1.5. Let's see if we can find this here. She's up by 1.5. And so in 2020, Biden was up by 4.5 nationally, not in the polls, but like actually he won the country by 4.5% on election day 2020. Now in the polls, he was down by 3.5, I think, nationally at a certain point. So he was doing 8% worse, nationally compared to 2020. So if you had an 8-point swing everywhere, he would have lost all the swing states, and he would have, been in a toss-up race in Minnesota, New Hampshire, New Mexico, and he would have been close to losing Virginia too. Now, Kamala Harris is up by 1.5 points. So that's still a 3-point swing towards Trump, but what that means that, maybe she's losing some of the toss-up states, but she's still comfortably holding on to, the bluer states like Virginia, New Hampshire, Minnesota. Now, Texas was a Trump plus 5.5 states. So Texas was 10% to the right of the country in 2020. But in 2016, it was 12% to the right of the country. So it's still trended left relative to the nation, even after you adjust for the fact that the nation was almost 3% bluer or 2.5% bluer in 2020. So Texas is a left-trending state. Kamala Harris, I think, is a good candidate for Texas. She's, I think has some level of suburban appeal while, being able to turn out voters of color, specifically Black and Hispanic voters. And Texas is a diverse state. Democrats, the coalition for Democrats in Texas is very diverse. In the South, you have a lot of Hispanic voters in the Rio Grande Valley. You also have Hispanic voters in the cities. Black voters, specifically in Houston and Dallas, have really been big for Democrats in recent years. And then also Asian voters are becoming increasingly important for Democrats in the state because Texas is getting a significant amount of Asian population within the state. So, generally speaking, Democrats need to really turn out voters of color and hold their ground with white voters in the suburbs, and they haven't done that yet, which is why they haven't won statewide in Texas in a very long time. But I think Kamala Harris, she's not going to win Texas, but I think that she'll be able to kind of create that high floor. Again, Democrats in Texas, I think, because of their coalition, have a high floor when they can turn it out. So I think she'll get like a good chunk of the vote here. And I think she'll make it closer than people think. I don't think that she really has a chance to win it unless she like really, really tries, unless the environment gets better for Democrats, which I don't think it will. But broadly speaking, Kamala Harris has a lot of upside here, and that's why I think she'll lose by less than Biden would have. So those are my thoughts on Texas. And then to kind of go over to our lean Harris states, I think I see one. Michigan's going to flip back here. And my final prediction for Trump versus Biden, I had Trump a narrow favorite here by like half a point. I think Harris will win it by like 2 or something. Again, the poll's been pretty good for her here. They have been all over the place. Again, if you take a look at the recent surveys, we had Morning Consult had her up by 11, which I thought was a little ridiculous. But POS, which is a more GOP leaning poll, had them tied. Ironically, Red Eagle Politics did a poll. I think he had, he sponsored it. He didn't do it. I think he paid for it for a Twitter account that goes by SoCal Research. They had Trump up by 3, which I don't really think should come as a surprise. Obviously, I'm not a huge fan of letting anyone conduct polls and having it thrown into the 538 average, but again, and also I genuinely don't think that this poll was done to actually get, I wonder who's winning Michigan. It's more like, I'm going to justify a Michigan prediction, because I think in 2020 Red Eagle was pretty wrong about most of the, whatever. Doesn't really matter that much. But statewide Harris is up by 2. And in the real polls we have, she's up by 11, which again, not great. This is not great either. So in like the more real polls, we have a tie. The most recent one post Biden dropping out. So it's a close state, but 2020, like broadly, my reasoning for Harris winning Michigan isn't really like the polls. It's more just like Michigan hasn't voted for Republicans statewide since 2016. In 2022, Republicans got smoked here. They have no money. They really, I think they were close to going bankrupt last year, and they avoided that, but it's not good either. And just in general, Trump doesn't need this state, right? Like he can win through Wisconsin or Pennsylvania, right? So Michigan is the bluest, and I think at the end of the day, Harris will get, because like to win Michigan, Republicans have to basically do everything right. And Harris, I think as long as Trump doesn't crater in Detroit, which I don't think it will, I think Harris will do well enough in Detroit, in Kalamazoo, in Grand Rapids, in Flint, in the mid-sized cities across the state to hold on, even if she loses more ground with rural voters. So Michigan, I think she's the clear favorite there. Now, that's the last lean state that I have for either candidate. So the rest of these states are all functional toss-ups to me, but I think there's some are clearer than others. I think the easiest is North Carolina. And again, a lot of people are going to say, well, this should be a lean state because, again, Donald Trump is up in most of the polling here. But again, in 2022, North Carolina polling was actually pretty good. It actually underestimated Sherry Beasley by, I think, like a point or something. But again, Bloomberg, Morning Consult, Trump up by 2. Redfield, Trump up by 3. PPP, Trump up by 4. PPP is a Democratic pollster, but in 2020, or no, he's up by 4 against Harris. PPP is a Democratic pollster, but in 2022, they were super off because the people who commissioned those polls were very adamant that Democrats were going to have a massive turnout disadvantage. So all their polls were super skewed towards Republicans. It remains to be seen how they poll 2024, but I don't love them as a Democratic pollster. But regardless, all the polls kind of show like a narrow Trump advantage here, which I think is correct. Harris will do better than Biden here just because she'll actually get turnout from black voters, which is what Biden was struggling so mightily with. Because in 2020, Biden could have won North Carolina if he actually had better black turnout. Because in the suburbs, he did a lot better than Obama. Because Obama was the last Democrat to win North Carolina federally, which is 2008. So it was 16 years ago, right? And Obama did that not because he had this Biden-level strength in the suburbs. He did it because he did incredibly well with black voters across the state. And black voters in North Carolina are a significant part of the Democratic electorate. Biden did fine with black voters, but he didn't get the turnout he needed to flip the state. Harris, I think, no guarantee, but the fact that she is a black candidate, I think helps. And also just the fact that she polls better with black voters helps, right? Like when you compare her polls to Biden's polls, she does better with black voters in every single one of them. You look at the favorability, she ranks higher than Biden. So just that reason, I think, kind of like Texas, has more upside than Biden did, but it's still pretty clear to me Trump's going to win this state. It'll be close in terms of margin, but I think in terms of like raw probability, it's a pretty clear Trump state. So it's interesting. I think Harris should invest here a little bit because there is a governor's race, which is important for Democrats, but Trump will still pretty clearly, I think, be the favorite here come election day. And so the next state that I want to talk about here is actually Nevada, which I'm also going to give to Trump. Now, Nevada is, I think, kind of like the Florida of 2024 in the sense, and I think Democrats are going to lose as badly in Nevada as they did in Florida in 2020. But Trump really has a pretty easy path here. In 2020, I remember I was going back and forth in Florida all cycle. If you watched my channel back then, you'll know that I really went, there were points where I had Biden ahead in Florida, points I had Trump ahead in Florida. But on election day, I picked Trump to win it because all he had to do was cut into Miami-Dade by like 2 or 3 points. Miami-Dade's a massive county. It's where Democrats, ridden Florida in, and they need to win it by like 30 points to have a chance of winning Florida. And Trump just had to cut the margin down to like 26 or 27, and he would have won the state. Now, he cut it down to like 7 points. So that's why he won Florida by like 3.5 instead of like 0.2, like I was expecting him to. But, he did it, and he won Florida, and it's been red ever since then. Nevada's kind of similar in the sense that to win Nevada, Republicans just have to cut into Clark by like 1%, because Clark County is where 70% of the population lives. It's where like 80% of the Democratic electorate lives, really, because it's where Las Vegas is. And it's one of 2 counties Biden won in 2020, and he won it by like, I think, 7, which was actually a decrease from Hillary Clinton in 2016. It's a working class area. You have a lot of Hispanic voters that have been trending right. If Trump can just cut into that by like 1.5 points, he'll win Nevada. That's all he has to do. So yeah, Kamala Harris can, definitely hold on to Nevada. And I think she's a lot better of a candidate for the state than Joe Biden is, certainly. But concurrently, Trump has an easier path here. And I think that when you look at, kind of the state and what his strategy is, it's similar to Florida 2020. So that's the new analogy I kind of thought of earlier today. And that's why I think Trump's going to win Nevada. Now, the next state I want to go over to is Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin, I'm going to give to Trump here. Now, why am I giving him Wisconsin? It's pretty simple. The polls are not bad for Kamala Harris, but even for Joe Biden, they weren't like that bad. So right now, Kamala Harris has a narrow lead. They don't have it on the aggregate, but I think she's up by like a point. POS has her up by 2, which is very good for her. Bloomberg Morning Consult has her up by 2, but again, they had her up by 11 in Michigan, so that's not great. And then Redfield tied, which is pretty good for Harris as well. But again, in 3 of the past 4 elections, we've seen polls overestimate Democrats in this state. And Republicans, unlike in Michigan or Pennsylvania, Republicans actually won here since 2016 because in 2022 they won the Senate race, and I think they also won a few down ballot offices. But broadly, Democrats have been doing fine here recently. It's not like it's Ohio where it's just completely slipped away from them. But the reason I think Kamala Harris is going to lose Wisconsin but win Michigan is that when you compare her polls to Biden, she does a lot better in Michigan, but not that much better in Wisconsin. Because Biden was holding up like okay here. If you go to the polls from pre-debate or post-debate but pre-dropout, Biden like did okay here. Let's see. Yeah, Civics had them tied. Biden was up by 1 in PPP. He's down by 1 here. That's actually Harris. He's down by 2 here. So, he was kind of even, whereas in the rest of the swing states, he kind of was crumbling. Like, he was down by like 8 points in Arizona in some polls. So, he was crumbling everywhere, but Wisconsin, he was like doing okay. And again, you have to remember that Wisconsin's electorate, especially like even on the Democratic side, is very old. It's very white, and it's not super educated. And those are 3 demographics where Biden was going to do better than Harris, or at least comparably better than Harris. Because obviously Biden does so much worse with black voters or Hispanic voters or young voters. As on the flip side, he does, he kind of holds his ground with older voters or with white voters. So within the Democratic Party, that's why, I think Wisconsin just coalitionally is better. Is that a word, coalitionally? Coalition-wise is what I should have said. But it's just better for Biden, and so there's less upside for Harris, if that all makes sense. Hopefully it does. And so finally, Biden won the state by like 22,000 votes in 2020. I think Republicans are going to I think statewide turn's going to drop on both sides, but I think turn's going to drop off by more in Milwaukee than it will in, say, rural Wisconsin. And I think that's why Trump has the advantage here. It's a close state. I don't feel strongly about this. I don't think Kamala's uniquely weak here, but I also think that Trump's has a pretty clear but slight advantage, just in the sense that his coalition is more sturdy than Harris is, and that Biden was holding his own here, and I didn't think Biden was going to win Wisconsin, so why would I pivot back to Harris winning it? I think logically I can talk myself into the Trump victory here more so than I can talk myself into the Harris victory, which is how I make these predictions in general. So that's Wisconsin. Now, the next state I want to do here is Arizona. Arizona, I also think is going to vote for Trump. Now, this is a state that I think, come November, I might have in the Harris column, just because I think the trends here are so good for Democrats, the way people often don't really talk about. But just as of right now, I think Trump's the favorite. Harris has only led in 1 poll, and it was the Morning Consult poll, which is pretty rosy for her nationwide. Again, you take a look at how she's doing everywhere else. PPP, she's down by 2. She's down by 5 in POS. Now, Emerson actually had her down by 8. No, she's really down by 5 when they push undecided voters. So, she's down by 5, which isn't great. But again, Emerson, I think, had Blake Masters super close to Mark Kelly here, and they had Kari Lake up by a lot in the governor's race. So, just in general, Emerson 2022 was pretty bearish on Democrats, so keep that in mind. But, most polls do have Trump winning. And again, polls in Michigan, in North Carolina, and Georgia have all swung toward, even Nevada have all swung towards Harris. Arizona's been a bit more stable, so I think there's less momentum for Harris there. Democrats do have a lot of good things going for them in this state, right? The trends in Maricopa County are really good for them. The Senate race looks like Ruben Gallego is going to win by a decent amount over Kari Lake, so that might hurt Trump. But again, for now, I think he's the favorite here, even though I think I'm a lot less confident than I am in say Nevada or North Carolina. So let's go to Georgia now. Now, this is a hot take, and I know I'm going to get flamed for this, but I think Georgia's going to vote for Kamala Harris, even if it were held today. So why do I think this? It's really just for 2 reasons. The first is that we've seen real movement towards Harris in the polls, and you can kind of see why. So let's go here. Trump's up by 1, but again, polls in Georgia have actually pretty historically underestimated Democratic support. It's not like a Ohio or a Wisconsin where the polls underestimate Republicans. In Georgia, they tend to underestimate Democrats. And then, you take a look at their most recent polls. Trafalgar, which had Warnock losing by 3% in November to Herschel Walker, they only have Trump up by 2. which is not the margin he wants there. PPP has Harris up by 1. Morning Consult has them tied, which is pretty good for Harris, I'd say. And then Redfield has Trump up by 5. That's a GOP poll. And again, this was just immediately in the aftermath of the dropout, and Harris has gained since then. She has the momentum here, I would say, although it's marginal, really. So that's the first reason. The second is that when you look at the coalitions, Georgia's a left-running state. Democrats need to do well with black voters and in the suburbs of Atlanta. And Biden wasn't doing that. Biden did not get the numbers he needed, or even come close to getting the numbers he needed with black voters, first of all. And in, Atlanta, in the suburbs specifically, actually, because those areas that have been trending most towards Democrats in recent years, Democrats didn't really have a lot of faith in Biden there because his approval rating in Georgia was so low, and Trump's was comparatively a lot higher. Now, Kamala Harris is a lot more popular nationally than Biden was, and she's actually kind of more popular than Trump, at least in the most recent slew of polls. And in Georgia specifically, she closes the gap, but she also is better with black voters. So this is one of the states where I think, like I talk about how Wisconsin, there's not really like a huge gap between Biden and Harris, so I wouldn't switch it from Trump to Harris. That's why I kept it red. In Georgia, there is a gap. Biden was doing so badly here that I think could be because, kind of the quarterback change, putting in Kamala Harris, I think that puts it back in play. Now, is this like a safe state for Democrats? No. And, the fact that I have this tilt should pretty easily show that. But it's a left-running state. Harris polls a lot better than Biden does here. Democrats have the momentum here. And again, Republicans haven't won state federally here since 2016. They've won statewide. Obviously, they haven't won a federal race here since Trump 2016 / Johnny Isaacs in 2016. So, again, this is a very, very, bad state for Republicans recently. And Trump could win it, definitely. He's polling well there for now. But first of all, there's no evidence to suggest the polls are going to somehow overestimate Democrats. And secondly, Harris is a good fit for this state. I think she has enough appeal to both black Democrats and moderate voters in the suburbs who, she needs both of them. So it comes down to Pennsylvania, and this is where I would say she should pick Josh Shapiro, because in my video from yesterday, I talked about why, the 3 candidates left standing for VP, and I said she should pick Josh Shapiro because he has the biggest electoral boost concentrated in Pennsylvania. But again, I'm doing this video assuming that she hasn't picked anyone yet, so we're going to give it to Trump. Now, if Kamala Harris were to pick Josh Shapiro, I think I'd put it in the tilt column for her, so she'd actually win the Electoral College very narrowly if she picked Josh Shapiro. But I think Trump, for now, would win Pennsylvania. And again, take a look at the polls. Harris is up, I think, by half a point right now. But again, Pennsylvania polls have underestimated Republican support by a little bit. Obviously not in the Senate race in 2022, but, historically they have. And then you look at some of these polls. PPP, Trump's up by 1, which is, I think, decent for him. He's down by 3 in POS. And then in Qantas, he's up by 1, which is pretty good. This poll's his best, I think, in Pennsylvania. He's up by 4. He's at 50% in Bloomberg. And again, this is the same poll that had Harris up by 11 in Michigan, up by 2 in Wisconsin. So they think Pennsylvania is by far the reddest of these Rust Belt states. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that. I still think it's Wisconsin, especially if Shapiro is the VP nominee. But, just regardless here, the polls do show Trump doing better. Now, the one downside in the polls for Trump is that Susquehanna, which is, I think, one of the best local Pennsylvania pollsters, has Harris up, but they did have Biden up before. So, again, they've been pretty friendly to Democrats all season. So, let's just talk about it. Harris, I think, will do better in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh than Biden did. I think that she'll do fine in the suburbs. I think Democrats are not going to have a lot of people say, oh, Harris is going to crash in the suburbs. I really don't buy that. She is to Biden's left, but not in a really meaningful way. And especially with her VP potentially being Josh Shapiro, even someone like Andy Beshear, I think that they would do well in the suburbs as well. And then finally, Donald Trump, I think, has gotten worse for moderate voters since 2020. Biden definitely did too, which is why Trump was actually winning against Biden. But, it isn't like the suburbs have a huge reason to swing right. So that's not why I think Harris will lose Pennsylvania. The reason I think Harris will lose Pennsylvania is that Republicans, the coalition here for the GOP is obviously in part rural, but it's also exurbs. And go to, say, a state where I have Republicans losing, right? Like, say, Georgia or even Michigan. That coalition is really rural. In Pennsylvania, areas like Lancaster, York, even areas outside of Harrisburg in like the central part of the state, or even like 2 hours out of Philadelphia, they're big in population, they're high turnout, but they still vote Republican because they haven't kind of swung left just yet. Or if they swing left, it's marginal. And I think that coalition in an election where I think the turnout might be lower on both sides by a little bit, That to me, you know, indicates that Trump has the advantage just numerically. Now, Pennsylvania is a state that I don't like to have any bold takes on till like the week before, because there's a lot of really smart people who write about Pennsylvania politics who I read because I want to get all perspectives. I read Democrats, I read Republicans, I read, nonpartisan people. And I will not have like a firm take on the state till like, the 11th hour. But I think for now it's pretty clear it's going to be close. And I think that, picking Josh Spear for VP would give Kamala Harris the edge here. But for now, again, she's an underdog. And by the way, she walked it back, but Kamala Harris used to support banning fracking. Now, obviously, smartly, electorally, she said, oh, I don't think that anymore. But Trump's going to use that against her. And that'll hurt her, I think, because it also hurt Biden here. And another thing you have to remember is that Biden was from Scranton, and Biden actually swung Lackawanna County to the left in 2020. I think Harris is not really going to do that well there and in that area of northeastern Pennsylvania in general. So, again, this is a state Biden won by like 1.2%, being from there and having a lot of advantages. Harris doesn't have those. So, right now, I think he's an underdog in Pennsylvania, and thus the Electoral College. But it's very close. And again, in my 2024 prediction where I had it was Biden versus Trump before Biden dropped out, Trump was the favorite in every swing state, and the election wasn't that close. This election was very close because you'll see there's 6 states that I have as tilt on your screen. And, I have 5 of them going for Trump, 1 of them going for Harris. And that's why Trump's winning. But if it's, 3-3, Harris would win. So very close electoral map, very interesting election. Harris, has closed the gap here. I think she's made this election a lot closer. But Trump still has a lot of advantages. He's more popular than he was in 2020. Democrats, I think, are still less energized than they were in 2020. And Biden in 2020 had a lot of advantages. He was, he had a 55% approval rating nationwide. He, got to run against a very unpopular president in Trump. And, COVID came at the worst time for Republicans, and a lot of people thought Trump didn't handle it that well. And he still won the election by 11,000 votes in Arizona, 12,000 votes in Georgia, and 22,000 votes in Wisconsin. So that's a combined 43,000 votes, and Trump be the president right now. So a lot of things went wrong for Trump in 2020, and he still came very close to winning. Do not underestimate him, at all. So that's where I am right now. I think Trump's the favorite, but a lot will change, and a lot has changed. It's a lot closer than it was even 2 weeks ago. So let me know what you think. Let me know what you want to see, and I'll see you all in the next one.